Jeffrey Dahmer alive today, more than not, would just be a tall old man with a quirky sense of humor sitting in prison and continue to play tricks on inmates and guards that he was close with. He more than not would have continued to be open and honest about his thoughts and open up even more about his crimes. Talk about the weird obsession he had with human anatomy. Dahmer is one of the serial killers that had such an aggressive story. He stands out from all of them. There's thousands and thousands of serial killers where their stories never see the light of day. But Dahmer's not only broke out into the mainstream media and infected it, it's still an infection that goes today and shadows most of the even well-known serial killers today. He's a household name. So if Jeffrey Dahmer was still alive today in prison, just an old man waiting his time, would his story be bigger or smaller than what it turned out to be? And to be honest, if Jeffrey were alive, he wouldn't even be that old. He would only be 65 years old. This is the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, still alive with us today in an alternate universe.
Milwaukee police found body parts in a North Side apartment, and now they wonder if they've uncovered some kind of death factory. This was the scene earlier this morning.
One longtime acquaintance describes Dahmer as one weird dude.
From our investigation, we feel that this individual strongly is involved in other homicides.
Dahmer has confessed to police that he drugged, strangled, and mutilated 11 men whose skulls and bones were found in his apartment.
Jeffrey Dahmer today would be now 65 years old, living a long life in prison, and still having a good chunk of time ahead of him. More than not, we could see him live into his 80s. But to see Jeffrey Dahmer as an old man, we need to know, how did this happen? Going back to the start of when Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to prison for life in 1992, it's where the story takes a different turn of reality to something that never happened. In 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer is sent to Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. From the time Jeffrey went to prison, he was famous. His case was already huge, but became even bigger. With Jeffrey Dahmer, there's Jeffrey Dahmer the serial killer, but then there's Jeffrey Dahmer and his apartment of horrors. And people wanted to know, still even to this day. While Jeffrey Dahmer was alive, his father, Lionel Dahmer, wrote a book about his son Jeffrey, talking about his youth, and even Jeffrey Dahmer was able to read the book and talk about it with his father. It bonded them together in this new moment with the new lives they now lived. Jeffrey in prison, and Lionel Dahmer, known as the father of one of the worst serial killers in history. But just in the nick of time as well, Jeffrey Dahmer, along with his father and his stepmother, they were interviewed. Jeffrey was open and honest about his mind and crimes. It's a lucky interview, to say the least, that we got to see Jeffrey Dahmer in reality for the first time. And last time, you see Jeffrey Dahmer in his personality as much as you can. Jeffrey almost seemed as though he was a large child, trying to understand why he did the things he did, almost like he was in trouble, trying to explain why he liked to dissect bugs. It's still to this day, in the world of serial killers, a very lucky interview that was captured at the right time. Because Jeffrey would be beaten to death 265 days later after this interview. In April of 1994, Dahmer, who was wanting to see a pastor but was afraid that he would just be told he was too evil, too sinful, but lucky for Dahmer, he did find a pastor who became a friend to him. As Dahmer started to see his new pastor, which would lead to Dahmer on May 10th of 1994 being baptized and becoming a born-again Christian, Dahmer was in constant contact with the pastor, where he would talk about how remorseful he was for his crimes. As the pastor continued to meet with Jeffrey throughout that year, till the last week he saw Jeffrey, which was on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, Jeffrey would give the pastor a Thanksgiving card, saying Happy Thanksgiving and how thankful he was for the friendship. But that same week, the pastor would later say that him and Dahmer were in the book of Revelation, that Jeffrey was very interested in it. But the story, as we know, would be that on November 29th of 1994, Jeff Dahmer was beaten to death in prison. But if we change the story and keep Jeff alive, What could have become of Jeffrey Dahmer for the next decades to come, even to this day? If Dahmer had never been murdered that day in prison, more than not, he would have continued his journey into Christianity. He talked about it openly in interviews. Dahmer could have taken this so far as to becoming an inmate minister or a prison pastor. He may have went so far as to even obtain his theological degree, helping him be taken more serious. He would have been meeting with inmates, prayed with them, and tried to help them find understanding and forgiveness for what they had done to bring them there. We know that Dahmer liked to talk to other people and was known as the prankster around the prison, although we do know as well that Dahmer had a hard time making friends in prison due to his crimes being so repulsive and making him a celebrity in prison. Other inmates were disgusted or just creeped out by him. But with Dahmer's intense past with his crimes, this could have been a great story of Dahmer finding redemption to pastoring inmates. More than not, this would have made him even more of a bigger star in the world of serial killers. The cannibal pastor, they probably would have called him. The next big element that may have taken place immediately going into the mid-90s would have been a continuation of another book with Jeffrey Dahmer helping write it. Lionel Dahmer, Jeffrey's father, who had written a book about his son, and Dahmer having a few issues with the book himself. As he said in his last interview, they may have just wrote a book together, describing each other's life together, Dahmer being the child, Lionel being the father, and trying to piece elements together of why Jeff was the way he was. What happened? Where? Could missing puzzle pieces actually be put together to find elements of why this all started? Dahmer would have been interviewed much more if he had murdered anyone else he had not talked about. There were still many deaths that Dahmer was believed to be a part of in surrounding areas around Ohio and Milwaukee where he had traveled and lived. But even some murders that Dahmer was questioned about while he was alive, he swore to police that he had not done them. And with that, there's much belief to believe that Dahmer was telling the truth. One thing we can say about Jeffrey Dahmer is that he really was one of the most open serial killers talking about his crimes. He really held nothing back. But as he's questioned about other murders that detectives are asking if he did do them, he would also be meeting with psychologists, trying to figure out more about what went wrong with Dahmer. Where did this all start? Why did it progress into the way it did? Were there things that he never told authorities that he was holding on to? Maybe there were things that happened in Jeffrey's childhood that he just didn't want to talk about. He didn't want to bring more shame to his family. Maybe there were secrets that he didn't want to talk about. There more than likely would have been hundreds of psychologists over the years trying to meet with Dahmer, trying to get quotes, recordings, anything they could to write books about him and with him. They would have wanted to study every piece of him. And more than likely, Dahmer would have taken up a few of them, talking about himself, talking about murders, going more in detail, trying to remember them, being hypnotized, trying to bring himself back to a few of the murders. Jeffrey more than not would have still ended up in many fights over the decades in prison. Dahmer wasn't a fighter, he was just big and strong. His prank pulling may have ended him up with some blows to the head. Dahmer was also known to shape his food into body parts while in the cafeteria, while sitting down with inmates eating chow. He would cut up his food, make little bodies, and use ketchup as blood to recreate images in his head, and joking with inmates. Many of them didn't find it funny nor interesting when they knew his past. It would make people irritated and uncomfortable in an already high-tension area. Dahmer would make comments to inmates, along with guards, saying, "I bite." These were elements that would cause inmates to be fed up with Dahmer and not want to be around him because they didn't know if he was telling the truth or not. Dahmer would have had to fight for his life over the decades in prison. There's no doubt about it. He wasn't liked in prison. Before Dahmer was actually murdered in prison, months before that, his life had almost ended by another inmate trying to cut Dahmer's neck with a shank that the inmate had made. Dahmer just escaped with his life that day. He was hated in prison. So if he had lived, he may have lived a terrible, unhappy life in prison, more than unusual for most inmates, because he would have to fight for his life. He would probably be placed into a cell 23 hours a day with very limited human contact for the rest of his life to prevent anyone trying to harm him. This had been threatened to Dahmer already while he was alive in prison, saying he was going to be taken out of general population, but Dahmer begged not to be. He wanted to be with the general population. Even Dahmer's own lawyer would say he thought he had a death wish. Although one element that could have unfolded in prison, and really may have been what really showed up for Dahmer's future, was time getting to him and his impulse taking over his mind again. Dahmer, in one of his last interviews, admitted to struggling with the takeover of the impulse that he had suffered with for most of his life, what caused him to take people's lives. We could have seen Dahmer recreate what he had done outside to his victims. Dahmer may have made a decision to find a person that he was attracted to. Dahmer would have taken his time with the relationship, becoming friends with them, where the person would have felt safe with Dahmer, something that Dahmer had achieved in the past with many of his victims. And with that, Dahmer could have found a moment to be alone with this person, where they let their guard down, being naive to who Dahmer really was. Dahmer could have taken this person's life somewhere where they were just alone together for 20, maybe even 15 minutes, where he could have beat the person to death, strangled them, knocked them out, but then had a knife with him. Maybe he was able to cut the person open and rub his hands through them, feeling his fingers inside someone again with warm blood. At the end of Dahmer's life, he would still be the Jeffrey Dahmer we still knew, then to now if it was. Whether he was a pastor or just a killer, looking for a moment to strike again. But one element that would have affected Jeffrey no matter what if he were alive was the passing of his father. Lionel Dahmer died in 2023 when he was 87 years old. This would have been a hard pill to swallow for Jeff if he were to live to see his father die. Dahmer loved his father, and their relationship would have been even stronger 3 decades later. Their bond would have been unbelievably strong, this being Jeff's main connection to any kind of personal relationship, an outside resource other than Jeffrey's brother, who wanted nothing to do with him and changed his name legally in 2004. It's hard to say what Jeff would have been like today. He would have just been an old man sitting in prison, still being interviewed, still being asked questions. Jeffrey Dahmer, what may have been.